Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 52nd edition of the Frankenstein chat. So it's our, it's not, I think we're a week out because I think we've missed a week somewhere along the line, haven't we? Because I think our first one, Stan, was the 1st of May. I think in the last couple of weeks, through one thing or another, we've dropped a week, but we're back on. And at the end of this, I've got a full list all the way up to the end of June as to who our guests are. But anyway, so how are you this morning, Stan?
I'm fine this morning. It's a nice day, and I'm just about getting my head out of traffic from last week.
Well, how long was it?
5.5 hours.
Getting back from agency.
Normally, just under 2 hours.
Yeah. Well, we did the same journey, not the same journey, but we travelled back from North Wales on the same day, and ours was a normal journey of about an hour and a half, took 2.5 hours. But yeah, and also good to see you're back in your home office
and stable.
Yeah.
There was a few comments about me becoming unstable
but actually it proved, and thank you to those who watch, that people watch right to the very end, because what Stan's referring to is the chat we had with Mark Borden, which has proved very successful. A lot of people are watching that, but at the end we lost Stan's signal as he was in his new holiday abode in Benlek in Anglesey, so his signal became unstable. But yeah, a lot of people picked up on that. It was right at the end of the video as well, so people are watching it right to the end.
Yeah, I've since that I've had a colleague send me a message to say his daughter is now a fan, and I said, well, she needs therapy. She is a therapist.
Yes, connected with me as well, so we won't mention her name, but it's great to have that sort of level of colleague joining us. It also it's a challenge to us to ensure that our discussions remain tip-top and well informed. So yeah, how long will it be before we get found out, Stan? I mean,
I've done a career on it so far, Frank. Imposter syndrome means nothing to me.
No. Well, actually, before we get on to what's caught your eye, I mean, this is the day after the local election, the Hartlepool by-election. So it's all kicking off, and people that I know who are very, in my view, very good councillors, but belong to a particular party, have lost their seats. And it's sad to see political careers sort of not end, but halted in this way, because certainly the person that I know who's lost their seat is a very hard-working councillor and does everything that person can for their community. Obviously, somebody else is now going to step up, but it's a shame to see all that sort of expertise, knowledge, in a way disappear from council work.
Yeah, I just fear that it's not the result; it's the fact that it appears now we're in complete tribal thinking. So it doesn't matter now what anybody says or does. We're already voting for the team that we are. Yeah, we are in.
It was interesting, wasn't it? Because I think before we pressed the record button, we were talking about mobile phones, and you made the point there, didn't you, that that's become quite tribal. There's no nuanced position on mobile phones in schools.
No, I always talk to people about shades of grey, because I'm old. It was a monkey's track, very long time ago. Yeah, and it's about. Well, it's the opposite, actually. It's about saying there is no black and white, there are only shades of grey. But I think now we're at a point where it's either black or white. It's you can't nuance things. You can't say, but with a little bit of this and some of that, it'd be the right balance.
Yeah, it's interesting. Somebody said to me when I was doing a leadership training course, I was a participant, and they said, try and avoid putting yourself in a position whereby it is either this or nothing. You know what I mean? Because actually you do need to find a position that you can actually say, actually, I think I was wrong. And actually, if you say we're doing this and everything's behind it and it's heart and soul stuff, and there's a lot of reputational damage that can occur when you have to then say, well, I got it wrong. There's only so many of those you can actually stack up really as a leader.
But there's a lack. I think there's a lack of passion. I think that's what's worrying me about politics. I'm not seeing the same politicians that I see maybe it's looking through rose-tinted spectacles, but I can remember people being passionate. And the last sort of passionate address I saw was Andy Burnham in Manchester.
Yeah. Well, Sean Fielding, the guy who lost his seat, the council leader, he was standing behind Andy that day.
Right.
And I'd be very surprised if Andy Burnham doesn't get in as the Greater Manchester man.
But I want somebody in Parliament who shows that kind of passion.
Yeah.
I think the clinical taking a part of your opponent works well in courts. I'm not sure it works well on a public arena like Prime Minister's Question Time.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel the same somehow.
Well, let's move. We haven't spent too much time on politics over the last 52 weeks, but because we've got these elections, we've gone there. Let's move to what's caught your eye this week, Stan.
Just a little tiny thing, and it doesn't. People think I'm mad picking it up, but I was looking at something on Twitter, a subject report, I think it was from HMI, and although the content of it was quite interesting, and I know you picked up on just where the schools were and what kind of schools that had been looked at, but what really caught my eye was the fact that the HMI signed the name SHMI, which I presumed was Senior HMI, which first of all I thought that's fine, Senior HMI, and then I thought Senior Her Majesty's Inspector, it doesn't work. You can't put the senior in front, it doesn't work. You have to put it in the middle, so it should be HMSI,
like HMCI.
Yeah, HMCI.
Yeah.
So somebody should have picked that up in Ofsted and said, that doesn't make sense.
Well, I would say, I mean, we are going back here now. But when Stan and I first met, we met as we were doing a year's secondment with Ofsted, inspecting schools primarily in Cumbria and Lancashire. And we had a reader for our reports called Jeffrey Hearnshawed. And I have to say, there were some people who would say that he was pernickety, he was fussy, he had preferred approaches, but he would have picked up on that straight away, wouldn't he? That would have been a Jeffreyism, if ever I've seen one.
My favourite with him was one of my last reports that he sent me a note. He always sent a note back.
Was this report delivered on time, Stan?
But he put, this is one of the best reports I've ever read. Here's my notes. And there was something like 200 points to correct. But things like, I mean, I always felt with him, I learned a lot about things like noun adjectives, which were really annoying when he picked them out. But when you rewrote it in the style that he suggested, it read so much better.
I think I may have told this story before, but I remember when I was a middle-ranking HMI, and my boss...
An MHMI, is that then?
Was it HM? Yeah, HMMRI. My boss was doing a session with HMI about how to improve report writing, and of course when we were doing it, I don't know how long, they were probably 50, 60 pages long, these reports, but they were moving to a sort of like 10-pager, so they needed to rephrase it, restyle it, and I remember the manager stood up and said, look, I'm going to give you these reports and the critique on them, and I'm not going to give you who they are because that would be very wrong. And I could tell from the handwriting it was Jeffrey Hearnshawed, and I said, it's a Hearnshawism. It's Jeffrey Hearnshawed. And I then said, this is amazing because this is actually, high quality analysis of text, really getting down to say, well, what do you mean by that? And her face fell, her whole course was shot to ribbons, because actually what I was doing was saying we must not forget, in the drive to get to shorter inspection reports, we mustn't lose accuracy and the nuance of it as well, so which is really difficult. I think that's where the reports just feel as though they don't really tell you very much, which is a bit like the little video that came out to support the MFL which I and there was one also yesterday, I think, about RE. There's been a couple about RE, of which I listened to, and I think it's really good that Ofsted's trying to engage in this way. You know, that HMI be encouraged to do that. But actually, I got to the end of it. I thought, well, I haven't really learned anything there.
No.
There is something about actually have, you know, you do need the written report to actually sort of, and support to actually take you through that, because it's very easy to say, like with RE, you know, you need to embrace a range of religions and challenging topics. But actually, what is a challenging topic, and how would you tackle something like Palestine? You know, how do you do that? You know, that's the sort of level of support I think Ofsted be bringing to this discussion. But anyway, my last
Earnshawism, which was one of my favourites, because it actually said the whole reports were wrong, and it was when people, including us, wrote reading and writing for different audiences, and he'd say, you don't write for an audience, you write for a readership.
Yes.
Audience is audio, which means that's hearing, and unless you're reading the story to them or the inspection report to them, they're not an audience.
No. I do think though, you've triggered something there, in that when I was listening to the I think it was the MFL and reading the MFL report, I was struck by I was struck by the fact that the HMI drew on research that wasn't Ofsted's. And actually I thought, in some respects, I'm thinking, yeah, okay, well, I get the idea that you know, that there is a body of evidence, a body of research that you might want to draw in. But actually that's already there. That the valuable bit that Ofsted brings is the observation of, you know, there can be no dispute that an HMI or a couple of HMIs went to these 24 schools and they saw this stuff, you know. That in itself is what Ofsted should be bringing, not because I think there's a real risk here that you get into this political arena, because a lot of research is independent, but it's written for a purpose, you know. And actually, if you're doing research on a particular subject, you know, what the researchers never say is, actually, this was funded by a right-wing think tank or a left-wing think tank, or I'm a long-standing member of this party. Or what, you don't get that. You know, there's meant to be that independence. I get that.
Well, do you remember it's quite some time ago, there used to be research done by tobacco companies, and the research would show, you know, that tobacco wasn't as harmful as people made out. Yeah.
Well, interesting. I thought it was interesting. This week is the 200th anniversary of The Guardian, and today they've done a piece which says the major issues that they got wrong. And one of them was asbestos, where they said asbestos, I think it was in the 30s, is a very helpful product, you know, and you know, and actually it's transforming a lot of manufacturing, you know. So I think it's for me, it's the issue around you know, the purpose of Ofsted's research, and I would prefer to see them just like we did. You know, like Hearnshawed did, like Miriam Rosen did, who we were mentored by, who was a product of Jeffrey Hearnshaw, wasn't she? She was amazing in the detail of that sort of stuff. But I'd much prefer to see Ofsted just concentrating on the stuff that they know really well, and actually, you know, this is a group of HMI. They're of all political slants. You know, they're civil servants at the end of the day, but you know, they've got their own preferred practice, or their, you know, whatever, to actually just go out and see what they see and report on it. You know, I do think there's a worry that there's trying to draw in bits of research to support what their findings. I think there's a bit of a concern. Anyway, my point was around transition. I'm the independent chair of the Blackpool Education Improvement Board. Now, I just want to say how we had our recent meeting of the board, it was last week, and colleagues worked on a transition arrangement for transferring from nursery into primary into secondary into college. And they've resurrected some good work that was done before the pandemic, but refreshed it. And I read a report, and I was just really pleased that they did that. There was no bickering, everybody's bought into it, you know, so the forms are the same. the joining days are the same and all this sort of stuff. But there was an interesting article this week about shouldn't transition be a year-long process? And I thought, well, yeah, I mean, the problem for secondary schools is that primary school kids often go to such a vast array of schools and they don't find out until quite late in the year. So you end up doing transition with schools that actually, you know, actually have little meaning for the child.
I reviewed some work in Stoke, which was fascinating. It was maths based, but they stopped calling it transition and called it continuity of progress.
Right.
From year 5 to year 8. So that they looked at not the traditional, you know, are we welcoming them into school? Are we showing them around the school? Are we doing, but actually what work are they doing in primary?
Yes.
Year 5, year 6, how does that then translate into year 7 and 8's curriculum? And, you know, it was really fascinating. I interviewed quite a number of people about it. And again, I expected it, but it was great to hear secondary teachers saying, wow, knocked out at what they're doing in primary. We had no idea that the year 5, year 6 pupils were so far ahead of what we were planning.
I think it, I mean, I've said this in Blackpool, but we're not doing it yet, is this idea that, you know, you end up taking your books with you as opposed to, you know, because actually if I'm looking at a piece of work from a student in year 7, I'd like to know what they were achieving in year 6. And, you know, you can have all the records you like, but actually a piece of written work or a piece of mathematics tells you a lot more than, you know, I think every level under the sun, you know, I mean.
The problem with that, Frank, when I was involved years ago with transition is there was a genuine feeling that nobody bothered looking at it.
Yes. So but if you have to use them, if you have to use that book.
Yeah, I was going to say, because the primary schools used to, and I understand, you know, the secondary schools were saying, well, it's great that the 4 schools out of 17 that come, primaries that feed us, have done this project, but the others have done something completely different. So we can't do that. It doesn't work. This one in Stoke, which has been led by a project around the maths, which is absolutely excellent in my view. But the difference was, let's look at what it is, transition, and not see it as a social experiment. See it as making sure that progress continues and we avoid that dip in year 7 and 8. And it was eyes wide open. And equally, the maths team that have done it have also identified gaps. You know, you'd be surprised to know that sort of shapes now are not something that are covered very well and measure, so that the high school were making sure that was in their curriculum in year 8. Year 7 rather, because it's not tested. It's not deemed as quite as important. But I just felt that because they stopped it being year 6 to year 7 and made it year 5 to year 8, it brought a different mindset to people about what they were doing.
It was interesting when Arlene and I went to China. We visited a couple of primary schools during that visit, and I remember going into a class of, I think it must have been year 4 or 5 children. I have to say it was a pretty stark, and I'd say, because it was a rural community, pretty austere and severe relationship between the teacher and the kids. And the teacher was using a microphone, but they were doing mathematics. And so I said to the teacher, or the translator who asked the teacher, you know, where's the shape and space work? And so the teacher went to 2 pages of this sort of like 300-page book, and it's all covered in 2 pages, you know, like it was just a minuscule element of the curriculum. I was struck by, you know, that, and also how able the kids were in terms of numeracy. You know, they actually did have a very good understanding of number, but there was no opportunity for collaborative work. I mean, there's nothing at all. You were hemmed in, you couldn't move. You know, once you were sitting down, you were wedged in. You know, there was no way. If you wanted to go to the toilet, it's a bit like those old buses when they used to have bench seats. You know, if you wanted to get off, everybody had to get out if you were near the window, you know, so it was the same there. But anyway, yeah. So, I mean, I think I think one of the things, you know, that just pick up on the point, the point for me was not around the work because on transition, because I know that when I was the head in Poynton, I was speaking to the head of the secondary school who moved to another school, and I was speaking to him recently, and he said the great joy of that community was that the vast majority of children went to Poynton High School from the feeder primary school.
Yeah.
So it was 95%, 90% of the kids went. So they were able to do transition work. So I remember that they did some work called Bubbles in year 6, the final term of year 6, and that was then picked up in year 7. And some of the teachers came from the secondary school to teach the topic. But the issue for me was just around books. It feels to me so simple just to ask the children to bring the books in to year 7. And then at least the teacher can have a look. Because I do remember sometimes teachers sending me children with their work. And actually I'd say to them, well, why has Mrs. Jones asked you to come and see me? And they said, well, to show you my work. And of course, the only way you knew whether or not this was for good work or not was to look back in the book to see whether or not this looked as though it was good work or not. You know, so I do, even at that level, I think that there's some value in it. But anyway, the other thing I wanted to raise today was just about where we are with regard to the fall off or apparent fall off of attainment from the lockdown. Because I don't know if you saw, but Data Lab and the produced a report recently, I think it was a couple of days ago, where they used this teacher app Teacher Tap, I think it's called. Yeah. And they basically use that to ask teachers as to, in primary, whether reading or mathematics were the subjects that, or the areas that have been most adversely affected. And I know it's not an academic study, but it was interesting that there seemed to be very little fall in reading, but a significant fall in mathematics. That their findings were that they'd lost about a month, and they were on in general about 6 months behind disadvantaged children. That is, before the pandemic. So also they've disadvantaged children have lost another month on top of the 6 months that they were. But it was in mathematics, and I wondered whether or not that's just a lack of focus on that amongst the work that was being done at home, or whether parents and carers didn't actually feel confident enough to tackle this.
Well,
with that discussion, well, this is new maths. This is not the way I did it. Sort of
thing. And I do think there is that confidence level. If you talk to people of our generation and probably the generation below, they're happy to say, "Oh, I was no good at maths," or "I was no good at art." Those are the two that I find people are willing to hold their hands up and say, almost as a matter of pride, I wasn't very good at that. So I do think there's an element of that, but also I think with maths, there's a practice element as well, isn't there? So there's a reinforcement, going back, doing it again, for some of particularly the arithmetical processes. And I wonder if maybe some of that's been lost in the frequently setting of the next piece of work without being able to really get to grips with whether that's been internally sorted in the child's head before they've moved on, because that two-way process is missing when you're doing things remotely. It's not as good as obviously in the classroom, and the teacher can pick up on individuals. But it was refreshing to see it doesn't sound good. It was refreshing to see it was only a month.
Yeah.
When there'd been these dire stories of, children being 2 years behind.
Yes.
I don't know, we were in lockdown for 2 years. Have they managed that?
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting, in Blackpool, the council pays for something called the GL assessments, and the assessments that were undertaken in the autumn of last year, after the first lockdown, showed very little fall. Overall showed very little fall in performance, and these are in mathematics and reading. I think there's a bit in writing as well. So it'd be interesting to see how this plays out, because it'd be interesting to see whether some local authorities or some schools have managed to prop the system up because of the way they're working or their approach.
The fear for me would be that if that becomes an accepted, oh, actually things weren't as bad, then we go back to say, well, we might as well just do the exams as they would have been. And for the disadvantaged children, those that did fall behind, it's a further disadvantage. So I think there's a balance between saying, maybe wasn't as bad as people made out, but it still happened.
I think also what I'm interested in, not just the disadvantage, is because this is a summary, isn't it? So actually, how severely did it affect the youngest disadvantaged in the year group? How, whether or not, was it boys or girls? Or I'm just interested to know if there are differences between, because we lump everything together in this disadvantage as pupil premium thing, but it's the nuance of it, isn't it? It could be that younger children have been given a bit of time to catch up a little bit. It may be that actually the whole group fell back. It may be that particular groups didn't. I mean, it will be interesting to see how this plays out. But
or the compensation, if you like, for being a month behind in maths, it is a much wider knowledge, a much wider independent learning.
Yes.
All those things that are hard to measure, but we do value. We need to know if those are. I mean, go back to what Mike Rotherham was saying. My daughter seems to have leapt forward in her independence, in her confidence. We need to measure that as well somehow.
I have to say though that Mike is a doctor, a psychologist. In a sense, he's got a lot going. That child has got a lot going for them, haven't they?
Yeah, except for when he was on a meeting with us, she was upstairs cutting her own hair.
Okay. Well, actually, Stan, I think we've nearly got to 30 minutes there. I think it's 25, and I'm full of a cold today. I don't know where I picked that up from. Not been anywhere. Anyway,
I've got a cold.
I know. Well, the thing is that
unless you've broken social distancing.
I know. Well, I don't know. Anyway, just to say, we for one reason or another, we had to postpone the Sam Twistleton chat last week, and I'm pleased to say that next Friday Sam is joining us. So we'll be into initial teacher training, teacher research, all this sort of stuff. So that's really fascinating, and I'm sure Sam's very well known, and I suspect we'll get a lot more people wanting to tune into that chat.
A thank you for Paul, who has graciously bumped into another.
Paul has been shunted out graciously. But the week after, the 21st, we have Max Pescatori, who is a Montessori nursery teacher leader. And so it'd be interesting because we haven't really focused too much on early years in our section. The week after that, on the 28th, we have Emma Knight, who is the National Governors Association. Is it CEO? But basically the boss of the National Governors Association. Then Paul comes back on the 4th of June. You don't know this yet, but actually my brother was an HMI in Wales. He was the English lead.
I did know that.
But he's agreed. I think we've got him on the 11th of June. And then we have Susan Brickell, who is a chair of governors of a primary and a secondary school in Manchester on the 18th. And then Emma Ainsworth on the 25th of June, who is probably one of the most inspirational young female leaders I have ever met, and be interested to see what her take is on how we manage to get female leaders through our system so that they can overcome some of the disadvantages that they face. So that's it up to the end of June. So Stan, there isn't going to be another Frankenstein chat, just us two chatting.
So much for going fortnightly or potentially going monthly, because
I think we did receive some feedback, which was basically encouraging us to keep going. So I think while people want to come and join us, and while we've still got the broadband connections in various parts, we will continue doing this. And the numbers are growing. The number of people that are subscribing and following us is growing. We never set out to be the go-to people, but it's really interesting.
Definitely not.
Well, the thing is that I find it amazing when you think that Sam is joining us next week. I've never met Sam. You have, but actually, it's great that people are just willing to give half an hour of the time just to chat and just let it roll. So anyway,
I think that's something that Andy Hargreaves said about it after we said it. You know, how did that go? And he said it was what you said. It was just a chat. It was. I enjoyed doing it.
I think the unscripted nature of it, and like with Andy, we did talk a bit about Burnley Football Club, didn't we? And
yeah,
and today we're on a little bit about politics. I mean, it does veer away every now and again, but we're really grateful for those people who do watch and do listen to this. And while you're still there, and while we've still got the broadband, and our hearts are still beating, we will still be here. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you for the chat with Sam next week.
bye.